Welcome to another Ethnicity Center visiting speaker seminar. So this is the second of our term, and the theme of most of the seminars this term, you may have noticed, are aspects of national citizenship, national identity, national models, and integration. And that's the case today as well. Today, our speaker is someone I've known for many years, and actually I'm kind of surprised that we haven't already had you speak to the center, unless we already have. But it's very good of you to be able to come today, and we're very happy to have you here. Dr. Marko Antonsich, who is a senior lecturer in human geography at the University of Loughborough. His research focuses on how togetherness in diversity is theorized, narrated, and lived within contemporary societies, focusing particularly on the idea of everyday nationhood. Funded by various institutions such as the US National Science Foundation, Italian National Research Council, CMIO Finland, and the European Commission, his work has appeared in leading academic journals, including Annals of the Association of American Geographers, Political Geography, Progress in Human Geography, and Transactions of the Institute of British Geographers, among others. His latest project is entitled New Italians, the Remaking of the Nation in the Age of Migration. And of course, that is what he's going to talk about today. He has sent us a web link where you can find out more about the project. It was in the details that Johan sent out to you, but maybe Johan, you can put it in the chat now as well, so people can access it if they want to. And finally, I'll say about Marko that he is the founder and convener of the Loughborough University Nationalism Network and the lead of the Migrations and Nations theme of the Center for Research in Communication and Culture. So welcome, Marko, and you're going to talk to us about your project, New Italians, the Remaking of the Nation in the Age of Migration. And I think we're particularly privileged that we are going to be the first people to hear your first presentation on the basis of research on this project. So over to you, and thank you.
Many thanks, Tariq, for the invitation. Thanks obviously also to Johan for organizing the technology that makes this meeting possible. I should say that I'm not particularly comfortable with this format, although over time, particularly with teaching, this has become the new normal. So let's make the most of it. Also because I think it allows people that cannot be physically present in one place actually to connect. So yeah, welcome. So thank you very much. Yes, this is the project I will be talking about. It is the latest, but it's not so new. It's been going on over the last, I don't know, maybe 5-6 years, and actually it's coming to a close. And it's true that I didn't present it as a whole. I did present obviously some parts of the project. So this is the first time that I'm trying to offer an overview of the whole project. Actually, partial overview. I will explain why in the next slide. So I'm not really sure how much I'm going to talk. As I say, maybe to Tariq 40 minutes, but Tariq rightly mentioned that usually academics, when they speak, they always say they take only 40, they might take 50 or 1 hour. So let's see how it goes. And I'm sure there will be time later for any questions you might have for this presentation. So let me go into the project. Thank you to Johan if she posted the link into the chat, but this is also the link to the project. Is obviously in Italian. or if you cannot read Italian, is also in English, has been funded by the Marie Curie Career Integration Grant. And it revolves around a very simple question. I mean, maybe it could have been framed even in a simple term, but basically is the idea, if the population changes because of migration, does also the idea of the nation change? And in order to study, research this question, I look into three dimensions. The first one is politics. So how politics has responded to the demographic change. And by politics, I mean mainly governmental and parliamentary institutions. So what I did was, with some other research assistants, to interview key representatives in each Italian political parties who were responsible for issues of migration and citizenship. And we also search parliamentary debates, again, about migration, citizenship. The second dimension is trying to understand what the so-called new Italians, and actually is a quite problematic terms. And again, I will come back to why this is problematic. But by new Italians, I mean people that have a foreign background, but identify themselves as Italian, either first generation or second generation. That actually was particularly the case for this project. And how do they claim a sense of national belonging, and how do they, what kind of Italy do they envision somehow? And the third dimension was actually to see how these claims put forward by the new Italians are actually received by the majority societies. So persons who don't have any foreign background. In order to capture these views, what I did was to go into the schools, organizing focus groups, again, with adult students, so it means above 18 years old, without foreign background, and interviewing the school personnel. So three different dimensions in order to capture, to answer the question that you see here. Before I go into the project, let me maybe offer you a bit of a context, this age of migration. The age of migration, and sorry, because I'm seeing something on the top appearing to me. Hopefully you can see the slide correctly. This is just a few statistical figures that capture the percentage of foreign-born in Western European countries. And you can see over the last 30 years, all Western European countries have experienced a quite important change in terms of the foreign-born population. And as you could see here, my case study, Italy, is not actually on the top of the list. But what is significant about Italy is the fact that it's one of the countries, if not the country, that in Western Europe has experienced the most rapid change, moving from the 1990s, where the population foreign-born was only 0.6%, up to the 2019. So that makes interesting, a particularly interesting case study. But if you look at the demographic projections, this idea that the population is becoming more and more diverse is actually captured by various studies. As you can see, they are not the most recent one. And I'm in contact with Lanzieri, who is the demographer at Eurostat. And I'm still waiting to understand whether there is any update about this projection. But it doesn't really matter whether it's by 2060 or whether rather than 2065, or whether it's 33% rather than 35 or 28, and the same for the other studies by Coleman. What we see here is a clear trend. The trend is that the population is becoming more and more diverse in terms of the ethno-racial composition. This change, and let me play here, if you want, my geographical, my being a geographer. If you look at the geographical scale, so if you move from the national scale to the urban scale, you see that this transformation, this demographic change is much more pronounced. Some of the cities are already, the white majorities are no longer majority in some of these cities. And if you take also into consideration the demographics, and so you look at the age cohorts, you see that particularly for the young generation, there is a quite significant difference. For instance, look at Hamburg in 2017. 32% of the population was foreign born, but if you look at the cohort 0-19 is the 50%. So we can't always look at the phenomenon at the national scale. So you want to capture this phenomenon, we need to look at the various geographical scales and the demographic compositions. Now, what happened? I guess you are all familiar, most of you are familiar with the cover by the Economist, is this new nationalism. So a sort of backlash. As the population is becoming more and more diverse, you see the rise of nativism that somehow fueled this idea that the nation is the new cocoon around which particularly the white majorities, they congregate as a last resort to defend our nation. So the sort of entitlement the white majority particularly have. And is also true for this country. If you look what happened with Brexit, obviously you have the little Farage there in the cover. Migration was on the top. So migration really is what fueled, not all of them, because obviously you have Putin there, but most of this so-called new nationalism have been indeed prompted by this fear, anxiety of the majority population towards migrants. Now, we might disagree, and obviously some scholars disagree. For instance, I don't know, Sinisha Malesievich said there is nothing new about nationalism. And I completely agree. It's not the point to see whether nationalism is new or old. This is not the point. But the point is to highlight how migration has become a salient category every time we talk about nation and nationalism. This was also true in my own project. So when I particularly studied the narratives of the politicians and some of the parliamentary debates, again, particularly mainly for center and right political parties, this new nationalism and the role that migration plays in prompting this new nationalism was really national, not necessarily new, as I said, was very prevalent. But I'm not so much interested in this presentation. That's why I said at the beginning, I will not offer you an overview of the whole project because we don't have the time. It would also mean to talk about the first dimension, the politics, but I would be focusing only on the new Italians and focusing particularly on children of migrants. And children of migrants is a particularly interesting figure because particularly the majority society is somehow perceive them as still as migrants. The racial visibility is something that stick, and it's something you cannot get away with. And in some of the encounters, obviously, it still comes up and mediate the encounters. And sometimes, despite the fact that these people were, so British born, fluently speaking with a local accent, etc., but still somehow they are interrogated. Where is it that you're from? So that sense of not fully belonging. So I'm particularly interested in the voices, somehow switching focus, not so much what the national majorities says about the nation, but what the people with migrant backgrounds can say about the nation, because I think there is still little investigation on how the nation is envisioned, perceived, experienced by people with a migrant background. And it's also true that, to be honest, the ethnic majorities, I'm still far away from analyzing the data. It was a huge study, so I've not yet analyzed the data for the ethnic majorities in the school. So let me present here the study about the new Italians. And what I will be doing first is present the sort of methodology, how data were collected. So there were two major data sets. The first is about association of children of migrants. And there are quite many associations in Italy. The most famous one is maybe the one that you see here is Rete G2. They were created mainly as campaigning for the reform of the nationality law, which is perceived as discriminatory because it's still based on the jus sanguinis, so the line of blood. If you don't have Italian parents, that you cannot become Italian. However, if you can show continuity of residency in the country, when you become 18 years old, you can apply. but it's not so straightforward, because maybe you might have some holes in that residency, because maybe, I don't know, your parents took you for 6 months in the country of origin of their, so in the country of the parents. So to show that continuity might be quite problematic. And so the reform was to offer an easier way to citizenship, to Italian citizenship, to avoid some of these problems that people had. So quite many associations emerged in the early 2000s. And what we did was to analyze all the posts, the forums, the blogs of these associations, always by tracing terms like Italy, Italian, nation. And we also interviewed 38 members, key members, people that were the most active, or actually they were the founders of some of these associations, to have a better view of of the role, of the remit of these associations. But the second data set was also very interesting, because there is a quite rich artistic production in terms of novels, musics, films, produced by, I keep using the term, children of migrants, although in one of the next slides, I will talk exactly about naming, how we name them. In this case, again, we analyze the artistic production, looking at these novels, listening to the music, the video clips, etc., but also interview some of them. Again, in this case, the gender divide was not so equal as in the case of the children of migrants active in the associations. And there were writers, rappers, film directors, etc. So this is the two data sets that were used to write, at the moment, 4 papers. And I think I will stop here. I don't think there is another paper that has to be written. And one actually is also under review. So in what remains of the time, I would offer you a sort of overview. What do we learn about the nation when the nation is seen, perceived, narrated by children of migrants? So let me start maybe with the first paper, exactly, the naming, which is so important. It also, as I say, I use the category New Italians, and it's problematic. And why it's problematic maybe will appear in a few seconds. So scholars, mass media, etc., they often use the term second generation. And second generation obviously is problematic because most of these children of migrants, or some of them, or great majority, depends on the situation, actually were born in the country, so they didn't migrate. So it's not accurate as a term, second generation. But the question then is, but then how do, I keep using the term, children of migrants define themselves? How do they call themselves? And here, by looking at the case of Italy, you see 3 different strategies. The first one is what they call embracing. And particularly the term second generation, it was embraced. Why so? Because I just said actually it's problematic. They are not migrants, but they did it exactly to distinguish themselves from the parents. We are not first generation. We are second generation. We are different from our parents. Don't treat us like them. We are not them. Particularly in this case, most of the people that are interviewed were born in the country. They consider them as Italian. And so they use the term, they mobilize the term as a way of highlighting their difference from the parents, exactly also as a way to claim this citizenship right, exactly because we are not like our parents. We didn't migrate, we grow up here, we feel Italian, we speak Italian, sometimes we don't even speak another language. So why we are not Italian also on paper, why we don't have citizenship. So this was the first strategy. And let me illustrate maybe with some quotes that emerge both from the forums, in this case, Refugee Duo, and individual interviews. So they mentioned that it was a provisional term. They recognized, and it appears particularly at the beginning, the early 2000s, but it was a necessary step. Why? Because it put us at the center. That term differentiates us from the parents, shows that we are here, the institutions have to do something. And as one of the interviewees mentioned, the term was available. We didn't have any other terms. And this somehow resonates with what Judith Butler mentioned. The possibility of the subject to express itself is constrained by the language available to them. You cannot somehow create a new category which does not resonate with what is around the public sphere. So what's around the public sphere with the second generation, and they somehow strategically use it as a way of voicing their own demands. The second strategy is about rewriting. In this case, was more about rewriting the term New Italians. And it's particularly interesting because what they do is a practice that people that maybe are familiar with rap music, and I come from a generation that I'm not familiar with, but I'm learning also because I find rapping a particularly interesting dimension to explore, again, the remaking of the nation. It might be a potential new project that I will be working on. Flipping the script. Flip the script is the classic strategy of the rappers. They use the name, but they change the meaning of the name. So in this case, they use New Italians, but New Italian does not stand for them, does not represent them. It represents a new Italy, a new Italians. There is the old generation, people that grew up in this multicultural context. We are all new. So what they interrogate is Italy. As I put it here, Italy and Italians become the object of interpellation. It's not them they have to be questioned, but who are you? Are you Italian? Are you not, etc. So this is particularly interesting. It's a really flipping the script. Very interesting strategy here that we have. Just to illustrate this point, why to use New Italians for the children of immigrants? It gives the impression you have just arrived to Italy as if you were the last to join the queue, second-tier citizenship. Can a 30-year-old big guy who was born and spent all his life in Varese is actually not far from my hometown, Lake Como in the north, yes, boring, I know, can be called New Italian? I ask myself, wouldn't it be better to use the adjective new for the country, for Italy as a whole? This is the point. They interrogate them, and this is a particularly powerful strategy. The third strategy is about actually challenging. They challenge both second generation New Italians because actually they are aware that this put them as a second-tier citizen. And what do they do then? Well, hyphenated identities. But back then in Italy, although it's so common, particularly in the UK, hyphenated identities were not so common in Italy. And then you see people that say, oh, hello, they present themselves in the chat, in the forums. I'm a Italian, Albanian, I'm Italo-Chinese, I'm Italian of Eritrean origins, and also interesting, I'm Italian, but non solo, that means but not only. However, if you look carefully in the way, exactly maybe because it's still emerging, back then it was still emerging, it's not so much that these hyphenated identities, they challenge the nation. They somehow make the nation a Creole. They contaminate the nation. No, really. They somehow keep the two dimensions distinct. I'm Chinese because blah, 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 blah. I'm Italian because blah, 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 blah. So they keep the two distinct. That's why I put it that somehow these hyphenated identities, they reproduce this nation as bonded culture, rather than displacing the link between culture and place. With the exception, which I don't have time here to elaborate on, but of Black Italians. I should say the Black Italians are not the majority of the children of migrants. But what we see here is they are more politicized, and they particularly nowadays they use the term Afro-Italians even more. Yeah, it's quite frequent, the use of this term. And in this case, maybe more, I say maybe because there are also instances in which they try to rewrite the nation, again, challenge it, but it's more in terms of, the kind of Black diaspora, Black Atlantic, transnationalists. Now we also have the Black Mediterranean, etc. So not so much maybe the nation is the focus, but it's more a sense of identity politics here. But overall, what I'm trying to say here is that the importance to, if you want to understand the transformation of the nation in the age of migration, naming is a key side that has to be considered because it defines the boundaries of belonging, the boundaries and the degree of belonging, of national belonging. Let me move to a second paper, which is about the scaling. And I'm conscious that there is not necessarily a clear link, but hopefully overall, you can see how the nation gets rewritten when looked from the perspective of the children of migrants. And I should make a bit of introduction because obviously, particularly geographers have argued that the local is indeed an important category to constitute the national as well. But when it comes down to migration, usually what you see is these tales of two scales, as my Italian colleague Tania Rossetto put it, in which you have the local scales, the urban, seen as progressive, plural, inclusive. You can think about urban cosmopolitan conviviality, Paul Gilroy, and all other scholars that work around that dimension. The most recent one maybe is Valluvan. And on the other one, the national scale, which is perceived as parochial, homogenizing, exclusionary, etc. However, I'm not saying it's not the case. It can certainly be the case, but it would be reductive, analytically reductive, if we keep putting the two one against the other, because there are instances in which the local register was actually mobilized as a way of claiming national belonging. And I will illustrate this point by focusing particularly on the dialect, the local vernacular. Now, this is one of the videos, Forte Chiaro, Loud and Clear, which was produced in 2005 by a group of children of migrants that later on in Rome created Rete G2. Okay, the movie was at the beginning self-funded, but later it captured the attention of the institutions. So it was screened also in the parliament for the members of parliament. It received some funding from, can't remember which ministry, so for the post-production, then screened in schools. So it had a quite good diffusion in the country. And what you see, basically, the video was created to again, for campaigning for the reform of the citizenship law. Okay, and what you see are all of these children of migrants coming on screen and say, "Why are you Italian? Why?" I mean, and it's interesting the background. You can't see here from the photo, but basically, is a text. Is the novel of the French writer Camus, The Outsider. So it's particularly symbolic as a background there. But I'm not particularly interested in what they say. You see me as a second class, I beat you up. I mean, how can you treat me as a second class? I'm Italian, etc. Or, you know, immigrant to me. How can you say immigrant? So obviously these are interesting, but what is more interesting is how they put forward this claiming of national belonging. And they use the local vernacular. They use the Romanesco. And also when I was screening in Milan, in the north, all the people above said, "Oh yeah, but these are really Roman people, Roman." So let me show maybe the second one, and then I will get back to this point. Another example, even in this movie by Amin Noor, who is an Italian of Somali origin, which basically present everyday life in a bar. And the bar in Italy is very important as a setting. Is the, I don't know, maybe like the pub in England, is where somehow the ordinaries of the nation also gets reproduced. It's so iconic, like the piazza, the square, the bar. Is another of the typical, or if you want, stereotypical images of Italy, perceived from the Italian perspective, right? And this presents the ordinariness of friends meeting in this bar, again in Rome. And these friends are of a mixed background. You see some people, they are from the south of Italy, which are confused as immigrants. Some immigrants, actually, they are also confused as southerners. And I will go back to this point because it's particularly interesting, the role that the South plays in this context. But again, they use the dialect. Again, it's all about Romanesco. And by interviewing Amin Noor, he clearly mentioned that, you know, the dialect is exactly because they mark their Italianness. So it's not a claim of local belonging. It's a claim of national belonging that, in order to be more genuine, has to pass through local belonging. Because as Italians, we somehow recognize always, as if you meet another Italian, you also ask, "Where are you from?" And because you recognize from the accent, and if you locate a person in terms of the local accent, that makes the claim of national belonging even more powerful. So in this sense, you don't have the local and the national as opposite, but the local is mobilized as a way of claiming a more genuine form of national belonging. Now, I did mention, checking with the time, I did mention the the role of the South, because it's another strategy. I mean, I'm not sure to what extent it's conscious, but it is there and it can be mapped by a critical eye. How the South is mobilized, and I put down here this diversity continuum, blurring the divide between the internal other, the Southerner, and the external other, the migrant. Let me give you a bit of a context just to understand better what we are talking about. So Italy is one of the countries in Europe that experienced a great immigration. People migrated to the Americas, to Australia, and the 13 millions, apparently, according to some academics, some scholars say, is the country that experienced the highest immigration ever. And the second migration is the internal migration. As much as the people were obviously discriminated, where they were moving to Americas and not even treated as white people. Maybe I will go back to this point. The same happened actually with the internal migration. People, particularly after World War II, moving from the south to the north of Italy, because the industries were located in the north, so it was all labor force moving up. And you could find, not sure whether it is readable, but the picture at the bottom basically is about we don't rent to terroni. Terroni is the derogatory term for the southern Italians. So there was a very high discrimination that went up in the 60s and the 70s. And I should say, even now, it didn't completely disappear. Has somehow been taken over by the new migrants, but these old migrants, the southern, is still quite present in the northern Italy. This is a funny cartoon that represents the southerners with the mandolino, is the classic mandolino and flowers, romantic, and the father say, never, you will never get my daughter, go away. It's actually a song. So if you can Google Famiglia dei Terroni, exactly, that derogatory terms. And Polentoni is the name that people from the south give to the people from the north. But what I'm saying here is that Italy has a clear north-south divide, which is not new. It goes back into actually quite long into history. In the 17th century already, southern Italy was depicted as a liminal zone between Europe and Africa. Particularly with the foreign travelers, even from this country, going down to Italy and experiencing is a sort of Orientalism, anticipating the sort of Orientalism. And I can see still picturesque, that backwardness become also picturesque. Particularly during the Italian Risorgimento, so during the time of the unification of Italy, this became even more prominent. It was also politicized because obviously it was the Savoia, the kingdom of Piedmont, that was annexing southern Italy, where there was the kingdom of the two Sicilies. So somehow portraying them as uncivilized justify also that move of annexing the south. So the whole idea of Italians still today is very much centered in the north and portrayed as European, as modern, civilized, bourgeois, industrials, and obviously all the opposite is true for the southerners and the south of Italy, which indeed has become the internal other. And during this campaign, ideological campaign of constructing the South as an internal other, I should also mention the role that the positivist anthropologist plays at the end of the 19th century. Alfredo Niceforo, if you want to Google, I'm sure, maybe some of you are already familiar with him. But basically, he created this idea of the two Italies. The Italy of the North, where also racially is different, because it's based on Aryan race, and the people from the south, which belongs to the Negroid race. And I should say, by the way, Niceforo was from the south himself, but was not so much, was really, from his perspective, a scientific attempt to map the different races, but not as a way of dismissing the nation, because he basically was saying that despite these differences, we still have the nation. So the role of the spiritual nation, that also is important and overcomes the racial differences. Right. This was just the context for you to better understand the content of the paper. So what happened in terms of the children of migrants? What do they do? Well, they use the history of migration, first of the immigration to the Americas and Australias, and then the domestic, the internal migration, as a way of challenging the fixity of the we versus them, the rhetoric, we are Italians, you don't belong here, who are the you, these migrants? Huh? And obviously, children of migrants, what they do, they point out, guys, but you were the migrants. So it's completely bogus, this rhetoric. For instance, one of the conversation in the refugee duo, you know, the Moroccans, the Albanians, the Filipinos, who are the present migrants in Italy, well, they were you. Italian abroad means what immigrant means in Italy. So the ordering of Italian migrants abroad, so the ordering that the Italians experience abroad is actually the same ordering that the new migrants experience in Italy. But then they also went and looking at the internal processes again by pointing to the fact that, you know, you still have thousands of problems of acceptance among yourselves, you Italians, between Milanese, people from Milan, Bergamo, Napoli, Calabria, the region in the south. Where is the Italy which has to welcome me as a new citizen if you are the first to be fragmented? Huh? So they use this presence of fragmentation, the divide between the north and the south, and before the fact there were so many immigration, they were all migrants, to question the stability, the fixity of that signifier, we Italians. Who are Italians? So the second strategy was much closer to what I said before, the blurring, the blurring of the divide between the internal order and individual orders. So this is quite interesting because the children of migrants, actually, they see their condition as not different from the condition of the children of the southerners who migrated to the north of Italy. First of all, again, generational, because we didn't migrate. We were born here in the same people, the southerners, I mean, the children, they were maybe born in Milan, they were born in Turin. And so they were not migrants. So they see the generational similarity and obviously difference in relation to their own parents who migrated, but also class difference because they acknowledge they also went through hardship, like the children of migrants from the south of Italy, often confined into the suburbs, little money around, and sometimes ending up in the same school classes, sharing the same school benches. And this is particularly interesting because yes, we are like them. That's what they say. We are like them. But by acknowledging that we are like these children of southern migrants, they put themselves into the subaltern condition. If you want, people that are familiar with the migration theories, this segmented assimilation, downward assimilation, if you want. But there are also other instances in which this the marker of the internal order is mobilized. Here, for instance, you have Amara Lakouche, who is a writer of, if I remember well, of Algerian origins. Very interesting, very funny. Unfortunately, I guess they are only in Italians. And he plays with these characters. Some of these characters are on the covers. Is all mistaken identities. In which you do have a person from South Italy who is mistaken as a migrant, and then you have a migrant that speaks so well that actually is perceived by all the rest of the Italians as one of them. And so it's this idea that puts in question that who is really the Italian here in this carnivalesque babel of mistaken identities. And I mentioned before the movie Generation, which is also interesting, particularly the title, the second one, the one that is set in the bar in Rome. And again, you have different characters here. In this case, is Enea, who is actually the film director. This person is Amin Noor, who is a Somali parent, again, speak with his Roman accent. And then you have Vito, whose mother is Somali, but the father is from Sicily, and his nickname as Bangla, from Bangladesh, because of his visual appearance. And then you have Mario, who is mother from Rome. The father is from Calabria in the south, but is mistaken as a Tunisian. So again, is all this mixing that it creates a sort of continuum of diversity. How can we put a border and say, these are the Italian, these are not Italians? There's a mixing, a contamination that displaces the white fantasy of a unitary, fixed idea of the ethno-racial nation. And then there is the third, maybe, what happened again among the children of migrants. In their own narratives, they used the fragmentation and the North-South divide as a way of portraying a new plural and relational nation. Here have an example. The term Italian is a term of a community made of many parts. Again, you have the Pugliese, the Calabrese, you have the South, but at the same time, this South is put together with the Chinese and the Indian, as if that difference, is the same, is on continuum. Yes, I can be Chinese, but also Pugliese, and everything put together in this patchwork that create the new Italian. So when I say before, the interpellation is actually to Italy, should not be to the second generation. And maybe this is another case from an interviewee. Recently, I saw a girl from Puglia, again, a region in the south, and I asked her, but is it your mother from South America? Because she was mestiza, mulatta. And she said, no, we don't have any history of migration. We are white. But she was not white. She also told me that her mother's side was all black. So it's obvious there's something happening in that family, right? So adding our, I put down children of migrants, that's what she means, perspective, the perspective of children of migrants, can help Italians to reconsider their past, their mixing. This is a country of mixing, which the Romans are the last piece of a very old history of mixing. So the contamination is presented and put forward as a way of making the nation less ethno-racial and more contaminated, more the product of a plurality of differences that come together. Let me move to the last paper, and hopefully I will be on time with the 40, hopefully maybe, I don't know, 50 minutes, but anyhow. So this is about troubling. Troubling sameness, strangeness divide. By sameness, I mean the linguistic sameness, and by strangeness, I mean the somatic. And what happened here, when you listen again to the children magazine, is the disruption of the semantic stability of the nation. Again, always going back to the same point, who or what is Italy or Italian? Let me present you with a quote. This is an individual interview who is wearing a scarf. He's a mom, and she's taking the son or the daughter, I don't remember now, we'll see, to the crash. So she said, 2 weeks ago, I went to the crash where, if all goes well, my son, will have to go in September. And while I was speaking and explaining to the teacher the character of my son, she got lost and she interrupted me to say, what? But you speak Italian so well. They told me at the town council they were foreigners. So I asked myself, what did she retain of all my discourse about my son? Obviously, she was a mother, she was concerned. Is the teacher, so this is my son, be careful. He has this character, and blah, blah. On what did she concentrate more? On the character of my son, or maybe on the fact that she was expecting to talk to an immigrant, whereas she was speaking to an Italian with a scarf? Because she then totally deconcentrated from my discourse and concentrated instead on the fact that I was speaking Italian well, like her, if not better. It's the sense of surprise. What happened here is that the white Italian, the myth is that this encounter with a lady that from the appearance, she's a stranger. She's wearing the scarf. We don't wear the scarf, okay? But then when she starts opening the mouth, oh my gosh, but she's like me. How is it possible? It's a short circuit here, as I put in here down with Ahmed. It's the short circuit, the visual economy of recognition, the crisis of the reading, where our skins, our faces are supposed to hold the truth of who we are, but actually this is not happening because what I see does not connect with what I hear. So this sense of surprise happens oftentimes, and I can show you other quotes, but I'm more interested here to ask the question, what happened after that sense of surprise? Does it lead to a remaking of the nation? Does it lead to the reconsideration that that person that gets surprised maybe think about, right, maybe we are changing. I mean, she's like me at the end of the day. Why should I differentiate? Why should I think she's a foreigner? Does this happen? I don't have many materials that point to this, trying to answer this question, but let me maybe present two cases. The first, again, from a blog post. It comes actually from a person that actually later on we interviewed. It was an adoptee, grew up in Bergamo in the north. With Bergamo, by the way, is one of the strongholds of the Northern League, and where also the dialect is also quite very much used. And so what happened? When South Korea won against Italy in the Football World Cup, I don't remember, but right, suddenly all Asians of my city, Bergamo, became Koreans. Doesn't matter whether you're actually Koreans, not all Asians face, etc. You are Koreans. I stopped my car at the traffic light with the window down, and another car with 4 youngsters on board also stopped. One stared at me and with a mocking smile called the attention of his mates, who started insulting me. Bastard Koreans, get the fuck out of here. Obviously in dialect, exactly as I mentioned, Bergamo is also. Well, I'm rather impulsive, so I got off, angrily shouting at them, also in dialect. The importance again. They first looked puzzled, but then at the green light, they skid away, keep insulting me. So you do have a moment in which something happened. The people can't believe that this guy was an Asian, as far as a Korean, get back to them with the same medium, dialect. Oh my God. But then kept insulting him, okay? Is there really transformation here? Doubtful. Another example, the last one, and then I go to the conclusion. This comes from a blog from another website that we searched. I was at Fiumicino Airport waiting to fly to Shanghai. There was the queue. The speaker actually is a well-known character. I can mention the name because she's a public figure and she mentioned the name in the blog herself, Mary Pan. Chinese descent, and she was also on TV, so she did have a quite public role. Anyhow, she recounts her stories. Fiumicino Airport, waiting to fly Shanghai. There was the queue with for the U nationals, as you know, U nationals and all the rest, and the queue for all the poor devils, indeed. U nationals, the privileged, and all the poor devils. I got into the noble queue, so the U nationals, because she's Italian and she has the Italian passport, and the police officer behind the glass glanced at me in an unfriendly way. In front of me, just one person, whereas 1,000 people are in the other queue. His colleagues in the booth, where the poor devils were standing, tells him, look at that one. She thinks she can jump the queue. She shows the passport to the officer, he checks and gives back to her. His stupid colleague says, what? Have you let her go like this? He replies, she has an Italian passport. She looks at me, I look at her. The person, the police officer that was questioning, why should she jump the queue? Why does she go there? She should stay in this queue. So the police officer look at her. She look at the guest and she lowers her eyes. Finally, she shut up. Very powerful moment. What happens here is so-called returning the gaze. Always being stared. When you're different, you're diverse, people stares at you. In this case, you return the gaze back. So you challenge. And she lowers her eyes. But the question, by lowering the eyes and being shut up, what does it generate? Does it regenerate again a rethinking, or does it regenerate, as I'm most likely I'm thinking, and I don't have the answer, a sort of resentment that fueled even more the new nationalism against them? Oh, look, now they're also here. We need to do something, okay? It's just an interpretation, but again, to interrogate what happened after that sense of surprise generated by somatic difference and sameness in terms of language, in this case, in terms of passport, which is a classic civic moment of the nation, if you want, which is not enough. And it's partly enough because it allows her to trump what the officer says, but yeah, I mean, we can maybe pick it up again during the conversation. Right, let me go up to the conclusion. I don't have many conclusions because it's very much an overview of the whole project, but I point to this one that you might say, right, nation matters. We know that nation matters, yeah, but do we really know that nation matters also with people with a foreign background? Yes, of course, we also know that, because if you look, and maybe Tariq also can mention, every time you leave a survey, you see that, for instance, people with a background, sometimes they feel even more national than the others. But particularly with the scholars, you do still have a sense that the nation is the wrong register. You need to look at the urban. That's the right register to look at, because the nation is still disempowering them, whereas the urban is what empowers people. They are somehow different. And I'm making the case that it doesn't work that way. You should look at both. The nation matters and the urban cosmopolitan community matters. So it's a matter maybe of doing some extra research here rather than keep buying into this argument, the tail of the two scales. What kind of nation matters then? And maybe I didn't have enough illustrations to make this point, but it's more present in the papers. You have the chance to read them. The nation that matters is a nation which is de-ethnicized, de-racialized, where the belonging is not defined based on what kind of race you are, what kind of, basically it's always about whiteness, but it's more a nation envisioned, experienced, narrated in terms of practices, cultural practices. And again, here goes back to the point of the everyday nationhood, which is so important. It's what actually people do that bring them together. Is that commonality. What we do in Italy is different from what we do here. The way you queue here, for sure, you know, is different from the way you queue in Italy. Try to queue as a British in Italy, and you will see that maybe it's not so, it's perceived as a foreigner in practice. I'm making a stereotype here, but just to tell you the importance of the cultural practices. These are the ones that were foregrounded as more important when it comes to the kind of nation which is envisioned by the children of migrants. And this again goes back to a point which everyday nationhood scholarship makes about the importance of agency. The nation matters not so much as a top-down. They do matter also as a top-down, because there's a lot of discrimination that happens from the top-down. But if you want to understand beyond that kind of official narrative, you need to see what happens in the everyday, what people do with the nation. And I try to show also with these papers what actually the children of migrants do with the nation, and how do they mobilize the nation. So let's pay attention to the agency, because yeah, it is a very important dimension. I'm going to stop here. I'm conscious of the time. Not sure whether maybe, yeah, it's a 50. Tariq was right. It's not 40, it's 50. Thank you very much for your attention, and looking forward to any questions you might have. Thank you.
Thank you, Marco. Now at this stage, we'll let everybody in who would like to come in for questions and answers and discussion. But we're going to carry on recording the seminar as we've been doing so far. So your decision to come in is interpreted as agreement to be recorded. So if you come in and, I mean, you don't have to make yourself visually, you don't have to turn the video on. And if you do have a question, you could put it in the Q&A anonymously and so on. I don't think it's an issue with anybody, but if it is, you can do that. So Johan, would you let everybody in, and people could, if they want to, turn their video on, but for the time being, if you could stay muted till I invite you, if you have a question, I invite you to unmute yourself.
Yeah, I'm working on that. Just bear with me.
Okay, thank you, Johan.
Yeah.
Yeah, it does take 1 or 2 minutes to move from a webinar, which is the mode we were in, to this other mode, which I suppose might be called seminar, I'm not sure. But I can already see quite a few people coming in, so it'll just take, I think it'll just take a minute more. I think while people are coming in, Marco, they can hear us anyway, obviously. Some of us raised a point in the chat in relation to one of your early slides. And as it's not really all that important to your main topic, I'll just mention it now, because I think there's just a little error in one of your early slides about the demography of European cities. when you said that some of them had now become majority non-white, I think you actually meant majority non-national, because when you said London and Amsterdam became non-white in 2012, that's certainly not true of London. Our census data from 2011 was that while 45%, therefore a minority, less than 50%, while 45% were white British, actually 56% of London was white in 2011.
Right.
And the European country that has the most amount of people who are non-nationals in it is Luxembourg.
Yes.
Nearly all white. So I think in that slide you were
yeah. Let me answer to that. So the point of the cities, you're absolutely right. I just take the figures from a study by Schneider in 2018. So the study was published in an academic paper, so I use it. For the so I would revise it for future presentation and double check. I should write a message to that Schneider that published the paper that he got the data wrong. For the non-nationals, no, is the foreign borns. I'm conscious that Luxembourg, obviously, because the European institutions is the highest one. In that case, it's really foreign born. Some foreign born obviously can be citizen, so nationals. So, but again, we can obviously point out that you're right to do so about the figures, but I guess we should keep attention to the trend, and the trend is indeed this demographic transformation, which is what prompted me to interrogate the nation. So obviously, as I mentioned, data can be different, figures can be different, but this is the trend, and I think is what really matters here.
right. Okay, I wasn't disagreeing with that. It's just obviously there's a difference between white and nationality, or what passport you have. And actually most European countries don't collect data in relation to race and ethnicity. The UK does, and a couple of others do.
It's true.
But most don't. Where they do collect data on nationality.
It's true. Absolutely.
So,
There's I think is an issue. And also, when I think to quantify how many of the children of migrants are in Italy, we only have estimates. We don't have exact figures because this is not captured. So we think there might be about 1 million, but it's just an estimate. Yeah, completely right.
Okay, so Johan is telling us in the chat that some people want to stay in the webinar mode, i.e. listening, but don't want to be on the screen. And those who do want to be on the screen, she's let everybody in, and you can see who they are. So at this stage, if somebody's got, at this stage, two things. Firstly, if you want to turn your video on, please feel free to do so, but don't feel obliged to do so. Secondly, if you have a question that you'd like to put to Marco or a comment, can you indicate to us in some way? You can indicate by using the raise hand function, or just by turning your video on so that we can see that you want to ask a question. So at the moment, no one's doing that. So let me, John is. Okay, I have a question, but let's take John's first. Go ahead, John.
Hi, Marco. Can you hear me?
Hi, John. Thanks for being here.
Sorry, I'm just switching cameras. Thanks very much for that. I have two questions, actually. The first has to do with the sample. I don't know if it's a sampling question or just a kind of generalizability question. So so you talked about kind of local and national differences. You talked about regional variations and things like that. You didn't say a lot I mean, anecdotally, you said some things, but you didn't say much about differences between people by national origin. And I just wonder what if you could make some generalizations, or if you're able to make any generalizations about these sorts of experience based on national origin. I mean, I kind of find it refreshing that you eschewed this kind of typical variable when we do this kind of research. So if you have reasons for doing that, I'd be interested in hearing that as well. But I just think about people who claim Italian origins from Argentina, their experiences in Italy when they come there, versus maybe Albanians, versus people from sub-Saharan Africa, versus people from Romania, including Romanian Roma. I mean, so obviously, vast differences here in migration trajectories and experiences. And I wonder how that translates into this question of understandings of national identity. That was the first question. The other question just is on the difference between the local and the national. And I too have come across this kind of, local good, national bad binary. Actually, I think your work is quite a bit more sophisticated than that. But on this point that you ended with, I just want to come back to that. In the Italian case, because Maurizio Ambrosini has written on bad locals in northern Italy, Verona and other places where local politicians follow exclusionary policies or pursue exclusionary policies vis-a-vis questions of migration and integration and things like that. And so, there's different examples from Netherlands as well, from Rotterdam, from other parts of Europe, where you have these sorts of local exclusionary politics as opposed to kind of inclusionary expectation that we have, which doesn't go against the trend, but there are obviously exceptions there. I just wonder what your thoughts were on that.
Yeah, not sure if the second one is a question, but I can go back and then we can see the point. You're right. So there is not, when we look at the data, obviously, if you look at the charts, is quite impossible because the charts, all the website, people use pseudonyms. So it's quite difficult to understand who is actually speaking unless they reveal something about their own biographical trajectory. So it's quite difficult to understand that. Whereas when it comes to individual interviews, I should say that potentially, yes, the study was skewed towards the visible minorities, but it just happened to be, was not meant to be, because I think they were the visible, the general migrants with visible differences who were the most active, because obviously they felt the most the discrimination, I think, also in the everyday life. I agree with you, that would be interesting, obviously, to see, and I agree that potentially, I mean, I agree, I'm not sure what you think about, but my expectation is that obviously, yeah, it's quite straightforward. People with less visible differences, somehow they obviously, they pass more as Italians. So that sense of discrimination is not so much prominent. It can also be in their own narratives that it doesn't emerge there. But I think because actually the nation is felt when you perceive that difference, I think it's still more interesting to see where that happened. For instance, going back to the argument you make about the edge of the nation, this is what the edge of the nation is. So if you want to understand better the nation, that's where you want to put the focus rather than on the more ordinariness of difference, which is not perceived as difference in many cases in the everyday life. For the second one, I mean, I read it as you agree absolutely with me. So it's quite bogus to portray the urban as progressive. There is nothing progressive, as you usually say, with the geographical scales. Any sense of progressive is not attached to one scale in what you do with that. So the local authorities can obviously be discriminatory, as they are in many circumstances, or the other way around. But in that case, more than what the local authorities do is how the so-called different people, diverse people, etc., perceive the nation and the urban. And usually scholars always see that when they interview them, yes, I feel a Copenhagen, I don't feel a Danish, because these narratives here, which can be true. I'm not saying it's not true, it can happen, but I think offer just a view, and there is something more beyond that. Anyway, yeah,
Well,
thanks
if
for the
I could
question.
join that discussion. So the point that John's raised, the very last point you made about everyday nationalism, or nationhood as you called it, can be a source of agency, that's actually not a very good way of capturing some of the points that you've made, because you yourself said that some of the things that people are doing is wanting to remake the idea of what is Italy, not what is Milan or a suburb in Milan, but what is Italy. You said that people talked about, for instance, and you quoted about New Italy, rather than just focusing on migrants. So actually, people can express agency without any reference to the everyday, and it would be a mistake to assume that the everyday is the necessary site of agency. Agency can take place in engaging with the macro. So that's, I think quite important. And in relation to the other point that John raised, which I think is important, about, there must be different approaches. We'd be very surprised if there weren't, from people of different backgrounds and origins. I'd go one step further and say, but of course, your data may not capture this. I understand that. But my expectation would be that just as there's in Britain, the people of, minority status or migration backgrounds, including several generations, have different kinds of identity projections. They have different kinds of identities that are important to them. For some, color is very important. For others, national origin is more important. And for others, religious identity is very important. So the idea that there might be just one second generation identity that people are likely to coalesce around is probably not true, though your data may not be good enough to comment on it one way or the other. But secondly, a lot depends on critical mass. People have to dilute their identities if there aren't enough people with whom they can share what they regard as their more significant or primary identity.
Yeah, thank you, Tariq. Yeah, maybe take first the second point that you mentioned. Absolutely. I mean, there are instances, as I mentioned, particularly with the Black Italians, in which color is more important. It emerged there. But I would maybe mention a point which was particularly interesting. He came from a guy his parents were Pakistani, yeah, his parents were Pakistani. And he said, look, and he was a active member of the Rated G2, the Children Association, said, look, we are so different. I mean, in the association, you have people with different languages, with different ethnicity, with different religions, and Italian is the only common denominator. We are all Italians. That was particularly interesting as a point. Yeah. The second one, the everyday, absolutely. I mean, yeah, there might be, what is interesting, we should not forget that, we always have the, particularly from a certain perspective, the diverse people are only those that receive, whereas actually they're also active. And in my case, the everyday is just the locus where you can map this agency. You might say you can find in other instances, but obviously it can be elicit through an interview. In that case, there is not so much of the everyday. But particularly when you look at the forums, this is what happened between them, how in their own daily lives, they decide to open a computer and have a chat among themselves without any presence from outside. And for me, that's the context, the interactional context that I consider the everyday of the nation, where actually in the interacting, in this case was online interaction, was also offline because these people were also meeting outside. This is where somehow it was an interesting side to detect what kind of a nation was emerging out of that daily interaction, ordinary interaction among ordinary people. I'm not saying it's the only one, you're right, but I don't think we need necessarily to, I think yeah, I think it's quite easy, convenient. place where to map the possible remaking of the nation via ordinary voices.
Well, the question of whether it's easy or not is relative, but I won't go into that. John, were you indicating you wanted to come back in?
Indicating how?
Well, I thought I saw you kind of put a hand up. You may be.
Yeah, no. I mean, I'd be happy to come back in on this, but I see other hands up, so let's let other people come in and just time at the end.
I don't know which order the hands went up in, but I'll take Penny first.
Well, that's a shame because Marcello's hand went up first, but that's okay.
I thought it probably did, but I just wanted to cover myself.
Okay. Thanks, Marco. Always a great presenter. I always enjoy hearing about your exciting projects and everything. And hi, John, and hi, Tarek. Always happy to be back to you as well.
Good to have you back.
So, Marco, I'll start with one question and we see where we go from that. So I'm just thinking the way you selected your sample in a way, so you are looking at sort of grassroots organizations, but the way they act on like the internet, the web, that's why you use blogs, and then you obviously get to interview them, as I understand it. And you also use artists in whatever form they produce, films, songs, which in my opinion are two quite specific populations in a sense that, okay, let's say it is an overgeneralization, but they are quite active and quite vocal artists and people that decide to write about their experiences. So I want to know, do you have an idea or a justification of why deciding to focus on these people who are vocal anyway and eager to talk about their experiences of being different, of acting on the basis of being different? And specifically, I want to know, do you think that what they said and what they write, some of the stuff you analyze, for example, from a blog, might be there just because of the sense of anonymity that the web can provide to these people to be vocal about these expressions?
Well, quickly for the second one, it's difficult to say. We will never know. I mean, they are experts. I'm not an expert of on online ethnography or what is that. I mean, to what extent people they use anonymity, they are sincere or not, I don't know. But for the first point, I mean, I did it in the past. So in the past, we just went into the schools, organizing focus groups with the mixed peoples. And it's not that really you get something different out of that. What the difference is the level of reflexivity. So because the people, they're active, they have more time, they take some issues at their heart, they care about, they have more time to think about. So they are just richer in the way they articulate maybe same points that you might find through ordinary people. They are maybe less active and less articulate, but it's not that you really find a difference. I'm not expecting to see a difference. And to put it bluntly, given the point that we have so little time, just go where the things are. Don't just wait forever for things to happen. John spent how much time did he spend in Transylvania to find something? I mean, I don't have the whole thing. Let me go where I can find something. So, just practical. But yeah, I do take the point. Honestly, I don't think you might get different answers. I think there's more articulation, there's more reflexivity when you go to people that did spend the time because they care about the issues. But yeah, what do you think?
That's pretty standard qualitative research, which is not meant to be representative, but is meant to find ways of thinking, doing, and being which are interesting and potentially hidden rather than trying to be representative.
Definitely agree on that. I'm just pointing out that whether or not you're going to find something different is up to grabs. You don't know that. You might, but just a reflexivity point or reflection point here.
Okay, so there are two more questions. Marcello Maneri has put his hand up, and Max Guarini has a question in the Q&A. So I know Marcello's next, so we'll take him and then move to Max after we finish. So go ahead, Marcello. You can unmute yourself and put your question.
Thank you. Yes, I come back to the question of identification with the place, the urban belonging, and with the nation. And I think too that we cannot make a rigid opposition between the two. And in fact, I think that also the context matters. If I'm asked about where I belong to, when I find myself in the United States, maybe I say Italian. But if I am asked when I'm in Italy, maybe I'll answer thinking of my city or my region. And together with M. Morning, we did a study, a similar one, well, to a certain extent, about Italians' ideas of difference, about different genealogical groups. And we also asked about belonging. And we saw that people had many senses of belonging, and very often they mentioned the nation just as a taken for granted belonging, but then they identified most with the place, which is where they ground their culture. And so I understand what Marco said about the use of urban culture, speaking dialect, as a way of showing belonging to the nation as a strategy. And also in our study, we saw that Italians tended to consider to have less prejudice, to consider more similar, to accept people who, for example, they gave the example, well, they even speak dialects, and this was a bonus to admit them in the overall community. So I quite get the Marco's point about their urban strategy, so to speak. But I'm curious, I know that it's not the object of this presentation, but I'm curious about knowing what the majority population said about maybe about their belonging and about how did they perceive the second generation or the children of migration.
Yeah, Marcello, as I said, I wish I could answer, but the third dimension of my study, the data have not yet been analyzed. There are so many data that the ethnic majorities, we didn't have yet time to look at them. Just maybe to go back to a point that you mentioned, because you say it depends how the majority society, that maybe talk more about their own place than the nation. This is also due to the fact that their national belonging is not in question, so it's taken for granted. And so it's normal that they engage more with the local, regional. Whereas if you are a visible child of migrants, your national belonging is in question all the time. It's questioned. The question is on your skin. Every time you encounter, if that person doesn't know you, is always questioned. And so necessarily the nation is more salient as a category in this group compared to the white population. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you, Marco. So, as I said, we have a question in the Q&A from Max Guarini. I take it that, Max, you've put it in the Q&A because you don't want to yourself ask the question orally. So that everybody can follow the same question, I'll read it out. It's quite yeah. a long bit of text, but I'll read it out. Hi, Marco. First of all, thank you for the really interesting presentation. I'm an Anglo-Italian, and although I was born in England, I grew up in Italy for most of my childhood. I see myself as both English and Italian, but I found that both Brits and Italians often expected me to choose a side. Well, of course, in the Euro Championships, I certainly can see that, yeah. I would often be asked which one I feel more, which one I was really. As I grew up, I became able to own this duality and would be able to confidently explain that it is possible to be both and that I'm able to switch depending on the circumstances. I found that most people could not get their head around this. I wonder how much this idea that for most people you have to be one or the other reflects the problem that people have in transitioning to a future in which many of us come from different parts of the world and are able to juggle different identities simultaneously. Currently, we're in a minority, and perhaps we will need to wait until enough people have a similar experience to ours. So that's the question that Max has put to you, Marco.
Yeah, thank you very much, Tariq, for reading. I just plugged the computer for getting some more battery. So, well, in terms of demographics, if you look at the demographics, if we have to trust the demographics, actually, you don't have to wait for long because, well, partially yes and partially no, but at the end of the century, the majority population apparently will be a mixed ethnicity. So the change is coming, but I guess it's just a matter of, you know, the classic self-identification, how you look at yourself, and social categorization, how people look at you. And particularly in Italy, that duality was something that the hyphenated identities was not quite around back then. Now it's become more familiar, but I still think that it's more, I don't know, I also have my own family, my daughter, I mean, she's completely mixed and not even two, she has 4 passports. But I don't think, I mean, if we keep thinking in terms of dualism, I mean, it's this and that, it goes back to what I said, in which we reproduce nations as abandoned containers. This is Italian, tick the box, that's Chinese, you tick the box. Whereas actually the future is about that contamination. And what do we get out of that product of contamination and mixing and whatever mess will come out of there? Nation will still matter, because however that ethnicity, that language, that culture, that religions mix, at the end of the day, if you are here for you, it can be Britain, it can be Italy for me, it can be whatever it can be, that territory holds something which is, I would say, just call it culture, which is so problematic as a term, but how things get done. And there is a sharing understanding, there are sharing expectations, how things get done, voiced, felt in this country rather than in other countries. So that nation will always mediate a certain group of people, however different that people will be in ethno-religious cultural terms. Maybe not, maybe it will change, but for the time being, I still see the power of the nation as a mediator in the ways we interact across society.
Yeah, so Max is actually now been able to join us. So you can unmute yourself, Max, and respond.
Hi, yeah, sorry, Tariq, you had to read that long question for me. And thank you, Marco, for the answer. There was one other thing, if I may. Thank you for explaining what you meant, which is, I guess, something that came to mind as you were speaking as well. I often found in the UK, perhaps because of the experience of multiculturalism here in the UK, people are much more sort of used to accepting the idea of someone being from 2 places at once and managing those things. I often found in Italy people had a bit more trouble being able to handle that idea. And so I guess if we look at the UK as perhaps, you know, an indication of where Italy may be in a few years' time, then I guess that might become easier for people to see people as being simultaneously, you know, from different places, I guess, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you. The point that Italy is just, as I mentioned at the beginning, if you're looking at the data, it was only 0.6 of the foreign born in the 1990s. It's only in the 1990s that Italy experienced a quite significant numbers of new inflows. So it's still a new, recently new phenomenon. And the majority of society still struggles more than other side. But what is somehow disappointing in this country is despite the decades of mixing of presence of people with different ethnicity, race, and religion, the discrimination along ethno-racial lines is still present. So that for me still goes down to how the nation is constructed and is still attached to that whiteness. You can add something else. It can also be class of the other dimension. But yeah, so yeah, maybe people will get more used, but are we gonna get really towards a more plural, inclusive nation? We don't know.
But you can have shared nationality and discrimination. Look at the United States. White Americans don't doubt that there are Black Americans, real Black Americans, but they may still want to discriminate against them when it comes to housing or employment or, you know, number of important social contexts.
It's true, but Tariq, I think the US obviously is the case of the settled nation. So I think it's a different case. Obviously here, I think there is still an issue accepting someone that is not white as a full member of the nation. The questions go home, it will still be around, it still be around here. I just don't know how long you've been here, your parents have been here, your grandparents have been here. They still tell you go home. And so case of European nations, I think is different from the case of, I don't know, settlement nations like the US, and in which migration is part of what it means American, etc. So yeah, sadly, but that's the case.
Okay, well, that's probably a good place to finish our seminar, because actually we have come to the end of our time. So I think we should thank Marco in the traditional way. And if you unmute yourself, I think we could do that.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Grazie.
Grazie, thank you. Yes, grazie.
Grazie, Marco.
Okay, thank you very much. I do appreciate
it. Sharing some of the data of your project that you still are working on, and making us think about what's happening in Italy, but also the issues that you raise in a comparative way, both in methodological and theoretical terms, but also in the ways our societies are developing and minorities are or are not becoming, identifying in certain ways and being accepted or not in certain ways. So thank you for that. I hope our paths cross again in the near future, online or hopefully in person. And in fact, I hope that of everybody that I can see on the screen. John, I do sometimes see in the building, but I hope with the rest of you as well. Our paths will cross again soon, online, maybe in an ethnicity center seminar, or maybe at a conference. So thank you for your participation, and look out for our remaining seminars this term. Thank you and bye-bye.
Many thanks. Thank you. Grazie. Ciao.
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 Ciao.